All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Coffee with the Curator. We're excited you're here today. I think this is going to be a really interesting topic. Very, very pertinent here to what we do here at the museum. So, and some of us, including myself, are really interested in this one to learn about our mummies, to learn more. Can you not hear very well? We'll turn it up a little bit. Is that better? All right, cool. All right. So anyway, my name is Brad, and I'm the education manager here at the museum. If you're new here, anybody new here to the Coffee with the Curator? All right, welcome, welcome, new faces, we love it. All right, we'd like to thank our sponsor, the Spice Merchant, who donates a pound of coffee every month for this event. Today's coffee is, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, Hugh Tenango. Anybody, any of you ever heard of that? I don't know what that is, but hope it's good. So they just kind of surprise me every month, and I just go with it. So, but Spice Merchant, if you haven't been out there, I go there. I actually grab a pound of coffee every month when I go there because I just love it, and it lasts me about a month. And then when I go in to get next month's coffee, I grab myself some more. So, all right. Well, our next month's speaker will be Larry Ministrina with a presentation called "The German Cossacks and the Russian Army of Liberation in World War II." So Larry presented for us last year. He's actually one of the donors here at the museum, has artifacts on display. So he always has a lot of interesting World War II history to talk about. So that one will be on November 16th at 9 a.m. So today we have our very own marketing director, Kristin Martin, with a talk called "Preserving Humanity, MOWT's Mummies as a Call to Introspection." So I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself before she gets going with her presentation. So please join me in welcoming Kristin.
Well, thank you, Brad. And so my name is Kristin. I'm really excited to give this presentation today. A little bit about myself, as you might see on there. I used to be an educator here at the museum. So I first started my involvement here in the museum in 2012 as a volunteer. I went to Newman University, and I was getting a history degree there. And Dr. Cheryl Golden, who some of you might know from past talks here, suggested that I start volunteering here. So I began as a volunteer here, writing signs for the Roman coin timeline on the first floor. And during that time, the then educator Jillian was like, "I need some tour guides. Would you like to do that?" And I said, "Not really, but okay." So that's when I first started learning about these mummies 11 years ago now. And it is ironic to me that I am giving this talk to you now because my older brother went to, I believe at the time, Museum of Ancient Treasures, depending on when he went, back when it was at the Garvey Center. You guys might remember that part of our history. And I had seen the commercials that there were mummies, and he told me that there were mummies. And I said, "I'm never going to that museum because mummies are scary." And I wish I could tell you I spent some time in the mummy room when writing this, but I didn't. I am still a little creeped out by them. So if anyone else feels that way, I'm with you. I managed to give those first few years of tours without going in there. I just tell the story and then, direct people in there. So after I graduated from Newman in 2014, I always like to tell this story. Literally 5 minutes after I turned in my last paper, I got an email from Jillian that she was stepping down, that they were hiring for the education director. So I applied and got the job. So my first job here was the job that Brad does now. I did that for a few years, and then I moved into programs, which does education as well as stuff with collections and exhibits. And then after the whole COVID thing and everything, I decided that it was time for a change. So now I do marketing here. So I've got a little bit of everything going on in my background, but it's really exciting to me to be able to move back into some of this education work with the collection. A lot of my background with these gals, these mummies, is, as we will see, there was a lot of research done, particularly on one of the mummies, Braided Hair Lady, in the realm of 2008 to 2013. So when I came in, it was kind of on the tail end of that. And there was still a lot of chatter by the people who worked here at the time and were involved. So a lot of this is stuff that I've been picking up during my time here, and then going into stacks and stacks of research from the files and bringing that out to present it, because a lot of it has been done but has not been put into signs or into tours or anything yet. So a lot of this is stuff that the staff here has not yet learned. So we're all very excited about it. All right. Oh, see if this is going to cooperate. There we go. Okay, so first off, I always like to start with this. So recently we added some signs to our mummies. You can see the graphic of it right here. We ask for folks not to take pictures of our mummies. I will be using pictures of the mummies in this presentation for educational purposes, but we do ask that these don't wind up on social media or on Google. We really noticed that they were popping up on Google and social media a lot, sometimes with jokes, and we just did not feel that that was respectful of them. So I just wanted to kind of explain my use of those photos, and then ask that if you take any photos of the presentation, just keep them for personal use. Also, just a note of the type of images that will be in this presentation. There will be some up close shots of the mummies. There will be far back shots of the mummies. There will be x-rays. So if any of that makes you squeamish, that is in here. I will try and verbalize that before they come up. To give a little context behind this presentation. So the mission of the Museum of World Treasures is to educate, entertain, and inspire lifelong learning. I'm really going to kind of take my cues from that as we go. I'm particularly excited to delve into this presentation with all of you folks, because I know a lot of you guys have come here a lot. Some of you guys are former volunteers or have been coming for a very long time. So I really think that the time to bring out this research is with all of you guys. So I'm very excited. Little info, I'm going to aim, and I've got my clock right here. So I'm going to aim to stay at 50 minutes with the my talking part, and then get some question and answer for you guys. Before I start, I wanted to kind of get a feeling from the room. What sorts of things are you hoping to maybe learn or hear during this presentation? Just to kind of give me some direction. Anyone? Yes, artists.
Are they? Well, I've seen them several times and wondered, you know, who are they? What do they do in life?
Yeah, so who are they? What did they do in life, etc. We will try and get into that a little bit, at least as much as we know. Yeah, anyone else? Yes.
And then how did you guys get them?
And how did we get them? We're going to go in depth on that. So I'm really excited about that. Anyone else? All right, cool. I always like to just ask that up front. Okay, so I wanted to give a little what this is and what this isn't. So the what this is we're going to talk about what we know, as much or as little as we do, about Baka and Braided Hair Lady. I will introduce them to you in a second. The timelines of their movements across the world, who discovered them, who moved them throughout the years. So they've been in quite a few places. What do we know for sure? And what questions do we still have? There are a lot of questions we still have. Things that I don't have really time or space or scope to cover in this presentation. Not really going to go into too much how mummification occurred. So I am going to assume a little bit of knowledge on that. If you have questions, feel free to ask, but I'm not going to go too much into that. Really won't be talking much about Egyptian culture or religion, just because I don't have enough time to do it. And at least at this point, I don't have a lot of time to talk about preservation and interpretation, but all of these things are things I would love to talk about in future presentations. So if there's interest, maybe we'll get into that later. Okay, and then kind of my overall idea with this talk is the idea that observing Baka and Braided Hair Lady can lead us to ask questions about ourselves and to really highlight the importance of preserving these mummies and other pieces of history, because it drives us to confront how we see each other and other people. The timing of this is actually really interesting. Some of you might have seen in the news, there's a lot of discussion on the national and global scale about how human remains in museums should be treated. It's very interesting. It's something we watch a lot. So this is very timely, because it's a question we're always talking about at the museum level. And, you know, it's a discussion that we are happy to have with all of you as well, because, you know, it is a very interesting one. All right, and then I do want to kind of tell you where the information I will be giving you comes from. So we have the Michael C. Carlos Museum at Emory University in their radiology department. One of these mummies used to be at Emory. We have a set of different doctors that have looked at these mummies. We have a former volunteer, Brand Lasource, newspaper clippings, which I will read from, Niagara Falls Museum, which is where one of the mummies used to be housed, and compiled notes from former and current staff. All right, on to the stuff y'all came for. We have the mummy. So if you walk into the museum, into the room, on the left, you have Baka, and on the right, you have Braided Hair Lady. I will say up front, probably not their real names. Almost for sure not their real names. Braided Hair Lady is definitely a name that was just given to her because we didn't know her real name and she has braids. Baka, we don't know where that name came from. There's been some speculation that her actual name may have been Bakette, and then it is a derivative form of that because Baka is normally known as a masculine name, but we just don't know. So these are our two players today. So I'm going to go over them one by one. We're going to start with Baka. We do not know quite as much about Baka, so I might fly through her fairly quick, but she's going to be that one on the left. Okay, so timeline of Baka. She is the older of the two mummies, older as in lived a longer time ago. We guess about 1000 BCE, presumably in Thebes, from what we've been told. In 1873, according to the New York Herald Times, a newspaper article, it says she was unearthed in Thebes by a doctor from Philadelphia who was an amateur archaeologist. At this time, we don't have a name on him. I hope maybe someday we will find one, but that's all we know. According to a different newspaper, in 1937, she was sold to a man named Charles Geringer, a noted collector of esoterica who purchased her on an impulse. This comes from a very interesting newspaper article about Baka. And then in 1962, she was purchased by a salesman named Robert Ganter. Ganter sold her for $200 and then decided that he was not happy with that price and that really he was sad that he had given this mummy up, and then he purchased her back for $1,000. It's a whole story, y'all. And then in 2003, Baka arrived at the museum. So we're real glad to have her here and not in her past. So going a little bit about her and her particularly, she is an adult female. We figure she was about 4 feet 6 inches tall, which is a little short even for an ancient Egyptian woman. We do think that she was a full-grown adult because her growth plates were closed. We think that she was from the 21st dynasty, New Kingdom era, perhaps 1000 BC. Things that we often note when looking at her: she's totally unwrapped. She's small. She does have hair. A lot of people wonder if it is a wig. It's not. It's just that there is some separation happening between the scalp and the skull. And probably the most noticeable thing when looking at her is she has quite a few broken bones and, around her neck. And even looking at her CT scans, you can see quite a lot. And we'll go into that in just a second. We do believe that this is from how much she's been passed around over the years. All right, so CT scans. I'm sorry, I was going to warn, I didn't. But here we have a CT scan that was done of Baka at West Wichita Family Physicians in 2011. So it says December 1st, 2011. This is a skull scan. So this is going to go around the skull. First off, down here, this is an above view. I don't know if you can see very well, but that kind of shows the almost debris field of her skull. And we're going to see how broken it is. But there is one detail partway through this video of her skull x-ray that is particularly interesting to us. And I will pause it when we get to that point. All right, now some of you guys might already know this one, but does anyone notice anything rather interesting at this point? Wish I could zoom in for you. So she has right around here, a dime-sized hole drilled into her skull, right in the middle of that shard. And we're fairly sure this was not caused by her being dropped, A, because it's in the middle of a shard, but B, because we had Brienne, the volunteer that I mentioned before, come in and take a look at it along with some of the staff at WSU, and they noted that it is a drill hole. So you can see the drill marks, and they think it was done either right before she passed or soon after, just based on how the bone has not grown back at all. So we're not sure exactly what this trepanation, that's the term that they use for it, was used for. It could have been, near the end of her life, maybe she had a head trauma or a, headaches or epilepsy or something, and they chose to relieve the pressure. Or if it was done afterwards, perhaps to remove parts of her brain. We're really not sure, but that was something that was very interesting when they first saw it on the CT scan. So we'll go ahead and let this play out so you can see the rest. So that is the rest of her head scan. All right, now this next one sometimes takes a little explanation for me. So we're going to start, pause it. So yes, this is a video and it's going to start up here and it's going to scan down through her body. So as you can see, I've got notated here where one of her vertebrae of her neck is actually kind of lodged inside of her mouth. So just kind of shows how out of place her bones are. And then it is going to scan down through here. You can see her hair right here. So that's pretty cool. I keep clicking the wrong button. So we had a collarbone there, and then we've got vertebrae here. Some remnants of maybe lung there. Different organs. We've got arms over here on the sides. Her abdominal cavity is kind of fallen in there. Here we have the hip bones, and then arms on top there. Gonna have her butt there, and then here's her legs, and then I pause here. Her femur, I believe that's her left femur. You can see that it's broken there. It is broken down the leg, and we'll see a little bit of that in the next. So we think that probably was due to a drop of the mummy after her death. Then here's the rest of that scan, starting from the same point. So you can see that break continues on down the femur there. Got the knees. And then the feet. And her little toes. Did that mostly make sense? Should I replay that for anyone? Good. All right. So those are some scans of Baka. Now we're going to go on to the newspaper articles that I have about Baka. And I should preface this with I do laugh and smile about this. I'm more so laughing at Robert Ganter, the guy who owned her. I don't want to give the impression that I'm laughing at Baka. I do find it a little atrocious how this guy handled her, but I am going to present it just as it is. So we have 3 different newspaper articles featuring Robert Ganter, the guy who owned her in 1962. We have one that is after he had sold the mummy and he wants it back. We have one for when he originally purchased this mummy. And then, yes, we have the one that the photo on the left comes from. So reading around on the left, so we have Robert Ganter on the far left with his lilies, for who knows what reason. Around the coffin that she is in, you can see it's made to look like a postage stamp because this guy sold stamps. It says only privately owned mummy in the USA. Based on my research, I highly doubt that. Mummies dealer. And then on the top, it says Ganter's Stamping Coin Gallery, Reading, Pennsylvania. I wanted to read just a couple of bits from this article because it is quite interesting. It says, Bobby is going to put his mummy in a coffin decorated like an Egyptian postage stamp and stand the old girl right there in Madison Square Garden, Exposition Rotunda. It's just a gimmick, he grinned on Monday, so people can say, oh, that's the kook with the mummy. The exposition director wants to see a picture of the mummy before he gives the final okay. Before he goes out at night with his friends, he wants to leave the mummy behind so the old woman doesn't crack his style. Cantor admits his mummy has seen better days. The old girl has a mouth like a fish, a face like a hatchet, and hardly any figure at all. In fact, someone once said Miss Baka looks like a wayward strip of cured tobacco. She has long brown hair, skin like a sweat-stained western saddle, and long, untrimmed fingernails. It may be ugly, Bobby concedes, but I always say that when the good Lord takes us, we won't look that good after a month, and she's been around for 5,000 years. So, when people express curiosity about Baka, Cantor sometimes remarks, that ain't no lady, that's my mummy. Yes, there's lots of such jokes in this newspaper article. So I will say, given what I've seen and researched this, he's pretty common for the type of mummy collectors that you see in this time period. So that's what we know about Baka. Baka, for reasons we will later see, is the mummy that we have far less information on. We will know a lot more about Braided Hair Lady. And that is because there has been some speculation as to who she might have been. There have been some people who figured they might know who she is. I will say up front, we don't know who she is. We have some hints that might lead us to someday find out who she is. And with the help of DNA analysis and face scanning and whatnot, maybe someday with the right funding, we will find out. But at this moment, we do not know. So what we do know about Braided Hair Lady, she's the one on the right that I covered for some reason. All right, Braided Hair Lady is an adult female. She's 4 foot 9 or 10 inches tall. I've seen several different measurements. She's from the 20th or 21st dynasty, New Kingdom era, probably 900 BC. Very notable features about her. Most of the Egyptologists who took a look at her and her CT scans noted how intact her skull is. If you look down through these CT scans, you can see all the little bits of sinuses, all of the little intricate inner ear pieces. It's all still in there. Her mouth is left open. We'll talk about the potential reasons for that later. Her abdominal cavity is packed from above with linen. I also saw some folks say they thought there might be some sawdust and beans in there as well. So literally they just took all the stuff and put it on top of her abdominal cavity and then put her hands there. I saw some things that said around the 21st dynasty, they did do more work to try and make a person look lifelike and filled out. So we think that's what some of that packing was for, just to kind of help her have shape. Someone counted 150 different braids and extensions. That gets me, that there's extensions, but I believe I have a photo later in here that really shows how it looks like extensions. And we also had several of the Egyptologists note that they think her hair and her fingernails were dyed with henna, which in the lighting downstairs, I've had a hard time seeing, but in some of the photos I found here and will show, it is a little easier to think that. I did also see one Egyptologist who thought maybe not. She couldn't quite see where people were getting that. So there's some question there. And then all of the black you're seeing on her is residue of bitumen or resin that was used to help stick that linen to her. There's also, in some of the photos, you're going to see little white specks. There's some natron salt that's still stuck to her. So natron salt is some of what they would use to preserve. So you'll see little bits of that stuck to her. More things, and this is one I had never heard in my time here. This is something I found on multiple reports, is they think that her ears were pierced for large bore earrings. And this is one of the arguments that several of the Egyptologists used to say that she was probably of higher status, was because she had these earrings or holes for earrings. She does have a mild scoliosis, not too bad, but her spine is curved. And her brain was probably not removed. There is some contention about whether it was totally left in there or whether it was just removed a little, but quite a few of the folks noted, and even in looking at the CT scans, you can see that you really don't see any damage up here that would indicate that the brain had been removed. I actually laughed when I looked at her sinuses because when I first looked at this, I had recently had sinus surgery. I'm like, dang, she has better sinuses than I do. they're all lined up, they're gorgeous. And also notably with the brain, you can see it on the scans. So we will see that in a little bit. But first, we will get into her timeline. So braided hair lady is a little bit newer. We think about 900 BC. In 1860, this is documented. Baka, we don't have as much documentation on her exact timeline, but for this one, very well documented. 1860, Dr. James Douglas visits Egypt and brings mummies back to Niagara in Ontario. So he actually writes a book and mentions, yeah, I went to Egypt, yeah, I brought some mummies back. And he donated at least one mummy to the Niagara Falls Museum in Canada, and it was unwrapped there. I didn't know that either until I started researching. So we don't know much about the unwrapping, but we know that it happened there. So it stayed at the Niagara Falls Museum for quite a long time until the Niagara Falls Museum was sold. It's passed hands several times. I think right now the Niagara Falls Museum is owned by Niagara in Ontario. But at that time of selling, it was transferred to the Michael C. Carlos Museum at Emory University, which is quite an important part of her history. Very exciting. And in 2006, she was again sold and she arrived at the Museum of World Treasures. And fairly soon after, more studies were done on her due to some of the things they found on her at Emory University. So this is an early sign from the Niagara Falls Museum that is said to have gone with this mummy. For the Niagara Falls Museum, the type of museum that we see at the time is very much a Victorian cabinet of curiosities, ooh, come and see sort of a museum. So gives you a little bit of background on this. I just noticed something on the way into work today. I was thinking about this. This right here is important. Wife of Amenhotep IV. We have no idea where they got that. We don't know if they got that based on where she was found. Don't know, but this actually conflicts with some of the other claims that people make later on about her. So I found that interesting. So that's a name I'm not going to try and pronounce that is associated with her. This mummy was placed in the tomb of Thutmose III about 1500 years BC. She was, I love how they word this, she was accidentally deprived of life by inhaling poison from a golden flask, which she supposed to be only perfume brought from Egypt by Dr. J. Douglas of Quebec in 1860. So there we have that 1860 number again. So that's one potential identity, wife of Amenhotep IV. I just found these yesterday. I'm very excited. So I discovered that the current Niagara Falls History Museum, that's what they're called now, has an online database through Past Perfect. So our museum, many other museums use a system called Past Perfect. It's a museum database system. And with enough time and enough funding, you can actually fill your database out so well that you can choose to publish some of it on the internet. And Niagara Falls Museum did that. And it was very helpful to my research, which shows how important inventory and stuff like that is. So here we have on the left, a brochure. I didn't find a year on it, but clearly we see braided hair lady on the left here. And then 1985, they were beginning to do research on some of the mummies they had at the museum, and it clearly shows braided hair lady and has some information about what they know. Didn't really tell me anything new, but I thought this was funny. I misread it at first and I'm kind of bummed, but I'm gonna have to get up closer because I can't read it on my tiny screen. So it says, notice the braids on the museum's female mummy. Another example of braiding was found on a royal mummy. Her name was Queen Hetawai of the 21st dynasty. I misread that at first to think that they thought she was Queen Hetawai. which was clearly not the case. But in the rabbit hole I went down trying to figure out why they thought she was Queen Hedawai, I found out that Queen, and I'm sure I'm saying her name wrong, I apologize. Queen Hedawai is known as a cocaine mummy. And I was like, do tell. In 1993, someone did some research on some mummies and found some cocaine. And they thought the mummies were doing it. And then when someone tried to replicate the study, they discovered, no, it wasn't the mummies that were doing the cocaine. So for some reason, but I was real excited that there was going to be a potential lead to our mummy maybe being called a cocaine mummy. That would be very funny. Not good for her, but very funny. So still, this does go to show how important the work of museums and the work of digitization and getting stuff online can be, because it helped me find some more information about braided hair lady. All right, and then when she moved to Emory University, basically what happened is Niagara Falls Museum sold off their cache of 9 mummies to Emory University. Niagara Falls sold to Emory University, and I'm not sure when people started suspecting, but this guy right here, does anyone know that mummy? Yeah, Ramses I, right? So yes, braided hair lady had a very, very famous neighbor at Niagara Falls Museum and at Emory University, which, as you can guess, led to a lot of research on braided hair lady and everyone else there, because there was some thought that, did these all come from the same tomb? Are they related? We don't know. And then also there was just, they would research all of them. So yes, eventually they found out this was Ramses I. And actually in this photo, you can kind of see what I was referring to with the extensions. You can see there's just a lot of hair on her head there. So we have a lot of research that was done, particularly in 1999 and 2001 about braided hair lady. All right, I'm gonna jump into some x-rays here. These are CT scans that were done while she was at Emory. So we've had CT scans done in 1999 and then in 2011 from the ones I showed you earlier. So here we have her head. As you can see, all those ethmoid sinuses there and all that very, very much intact, which leads us to believe that there was no brain stuff happening there. And then also we can see a lot of remnant brain material there. Here we have some stuff in her abdominal area. This becomes important in some of the later stuff we'll discuss. There's been a lot of, I don't want to say controversy, but conflicting opinions about whether she has a heart inside of her body and how many of her organs were left inside of her body. So I always find this interesting when I'm giving tours to students, because a lot of what we learn in school is that brain is always removed, organs are always removed, heart is always left in the body, and particularly braided hair lady goes against all of that. So I do like to kind of talk about that during tours. Like, Egyptian history lasted for what, 3,000 years? I mean, the variance that exists within mummification is crazy. So acting like there's just one form of mummification just really is not true. So we can definitely see that with braided hair lady. You can also see a little bit of her scoliosis there. Oh, we've got a better picture on this next slide. All right, here she is. You can see her spine is a little bent. They did note that they are not sure whether that was whether that was the case during her life, or whether how she was wrapped and how she was stored might have affected how her spine sits. We see that on both of the mummies, where the way their bodies sit is affected by how tightly they were wrapped. So on Baka, her toes are very pointed, her hands are very flat. On braided hair lady, you can see her skull is kind of smushed a little bit. And we think that might have also affected her skeletal structure a little bit. Okay, this next photo is the one that made me a little, so if you're a little queasy about mummies, this is just fingernails, but it's just very up close. Okay. So I had not seen an up close photo of her fingernails, but I think to me, this is really, well, I don't know. A big part of why I wanted to give this talk is, to me, it's very important to look at these gals not as objects, but as people. And of this entire presentation, this was the photo that really gave me a moment of like, wow, that this was a person. Like you can see the skin, those nails, you know, it really just highlights that, yeah, this was a real person. But you can see this right here. It looks like there is some red. And then down here as well, it looks like there's some red. There's some other photos as well, maybe even a little there as well. But that would be the reason that they think there may have been henna on her nails. In addition to the ear piercing, the hair, the braiding, the extensions, the quality for fingernails is another reason that Egyptologists think that she may have been higher status, or probably was higher status, because it's painted, but also because they're nicely filed down and such. Doesn't look like she was doing a lot of manual labor. Right, got some pictures of her hair here. Again, you can just like how much hair there is going on here, even outside of kind of her main head area. So that's her. She is a little crackly up here. She's in pretty good shape. Okay, so this next part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the conclusions that have been come to about braided hair lady over the course of different studies about her. So I went through all the different reports I could find written on her, and I'm trying to kind of show you some of the conflicting thoughts on her, and you can make up your mind which one you think is going to be the case. And, you know, hopefully in the future, we'll be able to continue these studies. So I talked about some of these earlier. We have someone saying that she's Amenhotep IV's wife, which is going to conflict with something we hear later. And then we have the Niagara Falls Museum. I wrote this before I realized that they didn't say she was Queen Hetaway, so my bad. Then we have, when she was at Emory University, there was a report written by a Dr. Heidi Hoffman. She said she thought her to be 20 to 40 years old. She particularly notes that the heart is very well preserved, best preserved heart in the collection of mummies. So not only does she think it's there, she is very sure it's there, which is going to be important later. No obvious attempt to remove internal organs, according to her, no incision, and you can see all of these different things. And really, Dr. Hoffman does not talk about who she thinks braided hair lady is. She's just noting the things she sees on the radiology. Then we get to a Dr. Bob Breyer. He notes that the hair is reddish because he thinks it was stripped by the natron salt. So he doesn't as much think henna for the hair. He mentions henna nail polish. He thinks early to mid-20s. So we see a variety of age ranges here. And he notes the lack of fusing in her knees. So that happens in late 20s, early 30s. So that's why he puts her before that. He notes the smallness of her breast tissue, which is going to conflict with later folks. He believes the mummy to be not thin, which is something noted throughout, which honestly is kind of crazy to me. I don't know about any of you, but when I saw that mummy, I did not think large person, but that is something that is generally being agreed upon by everyone here. And they dated her to he dated her to the 18th. I believe I meant to put dynasty there, or to the New Kingdom. So that goes a little further back than most of these other folks. Then we have a Dr. Benson Harrer who came here twice to take a look at braided hair lady. So this is research that was done while she was here at the Museum of World Treasures. He says 40 to 50 years old. He thinks he sees some gray hair, dental wear, and he thinks the growth plates are closed, which is, I think, different than what the guy before was saying. He notes the ear piercings. He also notes the wearing in the teeth, and that she may have had cavities. He thinks she was overweight. He thinks that she has larger breast tissue, which differs from Dr. Breyer. He believes transnasal organ removal is likely. So he thinks that, or I'm sorry, transanal. So he thinks that there was some organs removed through naturally occurring orifices in the body. And he believes, and this becomes a point of contention and a big part of the discussion about braided hair lady, he believes that her mummification was sloppy. And everyone kind of agrees that it is sloppy, but the reasoning is what everyone disagrees on. He thinks that it may have been because she was a criminal and her mummification was surreptitious. So basically you have ancient Egyptian religion. If someone is not mummified, you are denying them an afterlife. So if you have a really bad criminal, you're not going to want that person to be mummified. What's the worst thing you can do to somebody? Deny them the afterlife. So I think his thought process was, well, maybe she was a criminal and someone kind of snuck her body away and quickly mummified it. So, you know, maybe she could get an afterlife. That's his thought. Other things he noted, his big conclusion is she is a well-fed lady of high stature. Open mouth being due to the relaxation of muscles post-mortem. So basically just her mouth fell open and that's how it stayed. I don't see this noted in any of the Egyptology reports I have here, but since then I have seen more stuff come out and other museum staff have found it as well, noting a certain ceremony called the opening of the mouth ceremony that is documented to have happened with different mummies, where basically they would go in part way through the mummification and open the mouth on purpose and leave it that way so that they could talk or eat or breathe in the afterlife. So there is a possibility that that's also a reason she was screaming, but across the board, everyone agrees that this is not because she died screaming, like she could have, but that's not the reason that her mouth is open. Since she was stored with Ramsay I at the Niagara Falls Museum, this is kind of the beginning of a lot of the ideas or questions about her identity. He postulated that she may have been from the Deir el-Bahari cache, which was found by the Rasul brothers. This is noted by Zawai Hawass. Some of you may have heard of, very, very famous Egyptologist, that particular cache of mummies has a lot of royalty in it. So the thought is, oh, you know, if Ramses I is at this museum, maybe all the others are, and maybe this is someone who's related to these other mummies. And due to that, some of the information about how she was mummified, similarities between her mummy and another mummy, he posits the braided hair lady may have been Queen Taya. Queen Taya is very famous. She actually would have been the wife of Amenhotep III, not the fourth. So that contradicts, first off. She is very famous as a criminal, which is why the bit about the sloppy mummification is important. She was part of a harem conspiracy to try and get her son on the throne. And the mummy that braided hair lady is being compared to in this study is that son that was trying to be put on the throne. So Dr. Hare is positing that, well, if she is very similar to this son who was killed for trying to ascend to the throne, then this could be his mom, Queen Taya, who was killed. So that is part of the reason we have so much research on braided hair lady, is to try and figure out if we can decide that she is Queen Taya. Spoiler alert, we really don't have any solid proof to say it is her. We have nothing that says it isn't her, but we also have nothing solid to say it is her. So that's where that is at. But this is where a lot of the interest around braided hair lady has come from, that she may have been Queen Taya. So, of course, we bring in another researcher to see if they can add to that. We have a Dr. Susan Redford of Penn State in 2009. She notes the gray hair as well, but also says, you know, maybe it's blonde because she got dried out. She can't see the henna on the fingernails. She's the one who notes the beans, linen, and sawdust used to pack the body. She says 21st dynasty royal female mummy. This was actually an interesting bit in her report. She talks quite a lot about how braided hair lady looks a lot like a 21st dynasty female mummy, that there's packing on her to make her look more fleshy. You know, you'll look at her face and it is fairly well defined. Even how she is packed in the chest area and that you can see her breast tissues and things seems to point to a 21st dynasty royal female mummy. There's been a lot of contention back and forth about whether or not braided hair lady would have been royal. This is again one where I really can't say, or I don't think anyone at this moment can say whether or not she was royal, but it is fairly well accepted that she was of some sort of high status. But, you know, that could have been that she was a servant to a royal. She could have been a priestess. We're not quite sure. So there's that. And then she says, yeah, she could have been from that Darrell Bari cache as a servant or something, but she also talks about she could have come from a place called the Valley of the Queens, which is where she believed Queen Taya would have been buried. So there's some contraindications to her being Queen Taya. She also agrees that maybe Braided Hair Lady was 40 to 50 years old, which honestly goes against what I've been saying on a lot of tours. I was rolling with the 20 years old. So there is some question on that, 20th to 21st century. She says partial removal brain, notes that she thinks there's probably henna, even though she doesn't see it. She refutes the idea that this mummification would have been furtive. So again, remember I mentioned maybe a furtive mummification because she was a criminal. She's like, well, at this point in time in the New Kingdom, you just start seeing a lot more cheap mummifications or fast mummifications, which go hand in hand. You know, the longer you mummify someone, the longer you leave them in the natron, the better their mummification will be. If you go fast, the stuff doesn't dry out as well. It's not as good. You see some of the resin that's put on her, like there was too much and it's run back and it's puddled in the back of her mouth. You just see a lot of stuff that's sloppy and fast. So they think maybe this is just a cheaper mummification, not necessarily a furtive mummification. She's skeptical of the idea that Braided Hair Lady was Queen Tay. And she also notes that the fact that she arrived in Niagara in 1860 says that she couldn't have been found by the Russell brothers, these famous guys who were part of this cache with Ramses I, etc., because they were not active yet at that time. They were active in, I believe, the 1870s. So that's also kind of a messy part of the story. And then finally, I mentioned the whole bit with the heart. The reason our two mummies were sent to get a CT scan at West Wichita Family Physicians is because we were asked to join a study about atherosclerosis in Egypt, and the 7 cardiovascular imaging physicians claim that she has no heart, not even a trace. So that goes against Dr. Hoffman's study. So that is rather interesting. That goes against what we're all taught in class, that mummies always had their heart put back in so that it could be weighed in the afterlife. So that's a very interesting piece there. Okay, to wrap it up, I am almost right on time here. Why does it matter? Why does it matter, all of this? I think the big idea, why does it matter to have mummies in museums? Why does it matter if we study them? Why does it matter that we sit here and talk about them? Is I believe the way we treat these mummies speaks to how we value human life, right? So the mummy unwrapping parties, what does that say about how those people valued those people? What does how Robert Ganter put her in a coffin and took her out of trade shows? You know, how did he value her? How did he value ancient Egyptians? How did he value women, right? How does the original mummification speak to how Egyptians viewed life, right? The fact that they put this much work into someone. I like to talk about that with kids on tours. Like, you know, what do you think it means that they spent 77 days working on a dead body? What does that mean? You know, it means probably that they cared about their relatives, right? And then I think it's a good opportunity for introspection, right? Introspection, looking into ourselves. How does our modern approach to mummies reflect how we see ancient peoples? So to me, it's easy to look back and laugh at Robert Ganter or at the people who unwrapped Braided Hair Lady in 1860. In 100 years, are they going to be looking at us and what the heck were those guys doing with those mummies? You know, it gives us a good chance to think about how we're caring for history and talking about it, how we view these peoples. And it also begs the question, what is our duty as a society to these mummies and other people like them? So with that, that is the end of my presentation. Almost right on time. Woo. And I have time for some questions. Yes.
You said you would talk about preservation, so you have to get into it very deeply, but I'm just curious how you realize there's an environmental control in there.
Yeah.
Humanity.
Yeah, good question. So I am recording, so I'm going to repeat it for the recording. He asked about preservation and do we fix the humidity and things. So at this moment, our approach is For one, the biggest would be controlling the building. So we try and keep the building at a very particular level. We watch the humidity in the building, et cetera. Also within the cases, we've discovered that that creates a really nice microclimate. So I don't think we've opened those since I've been here. We just leave them, don't open them, don't introduce anything new, just leave it as is. And there's also, I know, silicone packs and things in there to keep it like that. Now, ideally, with more funding and other things long-term, maybe there would be a total environmental controlled case that we could keep them in. We're not there now, but I know we would really love to be there. So that is our current approach. Fortunately, mummies have been, by their very nature, made to preserve themselves real well. So we are fortunate in that, but I think that is something we would like to see more done on down the road. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Body plates? Embalming plates. I'm not familiar with embalming plates. Can you kind of?
So they were pretty prevalent in the 20th and 21st century. Some
Gotcha. I have never heard anything about it, and I would say probably not, at least for Braided Hair Lady, because it's been noted that she didn't have the incision. So definitely not for her. I'm not sure on Baka. Yeah, good question. Yes.
Went back to values of rotation of time. Has been research done through the subscription paper and publications of that.
That is a good question. I, off the top of my head, don't know how folks coming in and out were tracked. I know that's definitely something that's locked down now, but at the time, it seems to have been more of a free-for-all. I've heard more and seen more notes about who was doing the actual digging up of these mummies. So what it seems to be is you have locals, dealers, shall we say, grave robbers and dealers who go dig something up, bring it to market, and then sell it to, say, Victorian era folks. And then the folks who buy it kind of take the word of the grave robber. This also leads to a lot of confusion, and I didn't even mention that in here, is there's a lot of sell of coffins, and a lot of times they would sell a mummy in a coffin, but something that would happen is they go in and they take the mummies out of the coffins, bring them all, then throw a mummy back in a coffin. And well, now we lost that info, right? And maybe we've introduced more confusion because now we've got a name on a mummy that doesn't belong. So yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know, but I would guess there probably is some sort of stuff like that. So any other questions? Yes.
Does the museum here have a coffin for Braided Hair Lady or the rest of the coffin?
Yeah, so good question. I always say we don't have the mummies to go with the coffins. We don't have the coffins to go with the mummies. So none of it matches. However, in the research, I did find that there is a coffin. I think both of them had coffins associated with them when they came to the US, and they've all been sold off and separated since then. So one of the things that this brought up, I think doing this, I have a lot of new questions that I would like to research. And one of them is I would like to try and locate those coffins that were associated with them and, see if that turns up anything. I do know that with Braided Hair Lady, that was one of the questions they were looking into. And it turns out the coffin associated with her had no markings on it. So it was kind of a dead end. So there were some, but again, we don't really know if they were the correct ones, and we don't have them here. So, yeah. So I know that in 2013, there was a DNA sample taken. I have not heard anything about it was like an outside researcher. I've not heard anything about if anything came of that. At the moment, we don't have any plans on it just because of the funding situation. It is something we would love to do, but that's kind of where we are on that at the moment. So.
For the purchase or gifted this museum, and then a fully sized separate question, they're pregnant mummies?
Want to say I heard about a pregnant mummy, but I'm not sure. You'd have to look into that. As far as the ownership of these mummies, so these were purchased by private collectors, and then both of them were originally brought here on loan. One of them, I believe, has been since gifted to the museum, and I believe the other is in process of being gifted to the museum. That's something that we've been working very closely with those loaners on, because we feel strongly that mummies belong in museums, but also it's a very important part of our collection and our ability to give tours. So we're really excited to get that all finalized. So, yeah. It's okay. I'm sorry. Get broken. Oh yeah. So Baka, somebody was carrying her, right? And then they dropped her on her head, and it broke her skull. So yeah, we have to be very careful when holding people. Good question. Yeah.
I just have a comment. I know you said that the mummies kind of creep you out. I'm right opposite. I just love to touch something that old. And I know it's never happened with gloves, but I just think the little stuff like that is so cool. And just to say,
I touch that. Yeah. Well, and that's the reason I work here, is I love that. It's just at the dead bodies. It is funny because my youngest sister is a forensic anthropologist, so this is what she does, which is opposite ends of the spectrum here. Any other questions? Yeah. With the jars that come with them. Our mummies have not. We do have one of those jars here at the museum that would have held lungs. We've checked in it, there's no lungs in it, but we do have one of those. In Oklahoma, there's a museum called the Mummification Museum of Art, and I know they have 2 mummies, and I also know that they have a set of all 4 of those jars that still have the things in them. I'm not sure if they match though, but yeah, that is definitely a thing. They have been found with those jars, and sometimes they have the stuff in them. So yeah, good question.
You know, if that process, the canonic jars, if that was something that kind of came into fashion and then out of fashion.
Yeah, so that's actually related to some of the stuff I was talking about. She asked if the canonic jars came in and out of fashion. So to me, this makes a lot of sense why we would see these mummies without their organs taken out, because I just love this piece of the collection. So one of the pieces of the collection, which is not on display, is a dummy canonic jar. So it looks like if one of us today was to try and make a canonic jar and sell it as a fake, that's what it looks like, but it's not that. It is from kind of this era. Basically, you start seeing cheaper mummifications where they don't take out the organs. And so they still want to retain the look of having canonic jars. So they have these fake, not hollowed out canonic jars that are just like really cheap carving on them. So to me, it makes sense that you kind of see these sloppy mummifications with no organs taken out, and then you see these dummy canonic jars kind of all coming in around the same time. So yeah, rise and fall of fashions there.
Good job.
Yeah, I didn't get paid enough to get, I've heard there was like the 10-day mummification, yikes, the 40-day mummification, and then like the good royal quality 77 days. So yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
You talk in general about how modern people will treat the dead, and I recall hearing other things. There were like some outlaws from the Wild West that were killed, and people would travel around with them in exhibits down. And also from Kansas up in Salina up to about 330 years, they had that Indian village out there for years and years. Politics closed it down, and I just found out today for the first time in 45 years that my college, in our biology building, we had a display case with big jars with fetuses in it.
Yeah, we had those too when I was at Newman. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, people do that now, or living people tend to want to separate themselves from dead people for one reason or the other. They're not really like me, one on the line, if they're not. But different things happen to people living in the past. We can do that with, or people who are, oh well, he's a criminal, so he made a march in his body or whatever. Yeah,
I was reading up on this before this because I figured it might come up, and I'll probably make this last question, so because it's 10 o'clock, but that is kind of a large part of this big conversation that's happening with museums is, do we display bodies? Do we keep bodies? And a lot of it is you know, the understandable, these are Native Americans who've been dug up, or slaves that have been dug up and put into museums and put on display, and we don't know who they are. And even much crazier when they have living relatives. So a lot of the, I guess, first wave of deaccessioning and giving back human remains has been for people who've lived recently. I was even reading yesterday about the American Museum of Natural History having remains in their collection of like criminals, you mentioned criminals, from like the 1940s, and their bodies were without consent put into this collection for medical research, and then they were just there, and then suddenly they're on display. So it leads to a lot of questions because they have living relatives around who are like, why are you doing this? So it's sticky when you have living relatives, it's sticky when there's spiritual and racial issues involved. Legally, it's sticky, and it is different when you have ancient Egyptians because we don't know their families. So my thought process, or where we are kind of at as a museum field on that right now, is there's not a lot of legislation about that. So it's hard for us to know what's the best thing to do. And also our museum and most others will abide by what is put out by the American Alliance of Museums or even the International Council of Museums. And these groups have not really put out best practices on how to handle human remains. So that leaves us in a place of, let's do our best. Let's talk about them as humans. Let's respect them. And it leaves us in a place of continuing conversation. So it'll be really interesting to see long-term where this lands up, and you know how we can best respect these people. All right, well, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for letting me go for an hour. And if you have any questions, I'm definitely up here, and I've got my stacks of research you can look at if you want. So, thank you.